Welcome to today's RUC People. I'm very pleased to be joined by a good friend of mine, Mr. Jimmy Baigrie. Welcome, Jimmy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Jim, I've often looked at you and thought, despite your not being as young as you once were, or none of us are, that you still seem to be as busy and active as ever. Tell us what occupies your time these days.
Too much of the same stuff that I've done most of my life, and not enough of things I'd like to be doing more of, because I didn't have enough time to do them during my professional life. But I'm involved in a number of community groups, such as RUC, but in different activities. And I retain a very active interest in my original studies, which were in philosophy and marginally in theology, but also in my kind of professional background. I try and keep up to date, and I enjoy it.
So you're still working, and tell us a bit about how you earn a living at the moment.
I don't quite earn a living at the moment. I earn a very valuable supplement to some savings, which I managed to put aside, so that I have retirement funding that I've built up, and I continue working with the company that I co-founded, and that enables me to continue assisting with specific projects. And some of the client families that I've worked with over the decades still like to talk with me from time to time, and sometimes their children want to ask me questions about why things are structured in their family the way that they are. And in some cases, I've got more history about that than their own parents have, because I worked with their grandparents or something back in the 1970s.
So tell us a bit more about that work. What is it that you do for them?
These days it's called the financial services industry and fiduciary services. But I qualified as a lawyer. I suppose in a way that was a second qualification, but I came back to South Africa in 1969 and started studying law and working in a law firm simultaneously. And that led me into an area of the law which surprised everyone, that I was interested in it, which was wills, trusts, estates, deceased estates. And that leads you into tax, it leads you into investment management, and that leads you into what these days is called financial services. So my father was a surgeon, and I used to say to people, I'm a sort of financial GP. And I would work with specialists in different areas, but I enjoyed helping to put the whole picture together and achieve a comprehensive service for a client which any one person couldn't do on their own.
You're sort of a one-stop shop for people who need to sort out their money, both past, present, and future.
And that sort of thing.
And do you enjoy it?
I loved it, and I still do. I don't do any of that sort of basic work anymore, but it's a very satisfying thing to do. I think just like a GP, if you can keep your patient families healthy, you get a lot of satisfaction from it. So developing ways of doing that more effectively and growing a company around those objectives was a very, very demanding, but also a very stimulating way to earn a living.
So you mentioned that that was your second qualification. So what was the first?
Prior to that, I had done a degree in philosophy, which I did overseas. And
where did you do that?
I did it at a place called Heathrop College, just outside Oxford, but Heathrop held its academic mandate not from Oxford University, so it wasn't issuing Oxford degrees. It was issuing degrees mandated by believe it or not, the Gregorian University in Rome. And that was part of a continuation, I suppose, of my Catholic background, where I had decided at the ripe age of about 15 that I wanted to be a priest, and I wanted to do the kind of work which I thought I would enjoy, and Jesus would enjoy too. So I had connected myself in that way very closely with, if you like, for me, the core of Christianity, and that led me to go overseas rather than complete my original BA degree at UCT.
So you started a BA at UCT?
I started a BA at UCT, but by then I already knew that that was really a temporary thing. That where I really wanted to get to was to the Jesuit seminary, or novitiate as it was called, in England.
Right.
I had been at a secondary school. My secondary education was in Grahamstown at St. Aidan's, which was a school run by the Jesuits.
Right, so hence the Jesuit influence. And was your family Catholic? Were you brought up as a Catholic?
We were brought up very strictly in some ways and wonderfully freely in other ways. But we were brought up Catholics. We were sent to Catholic schools. The older children, the younger ones, all ended up, in fact, at Anglican schools, because my father said, I send my children to school for education. Their religion, I will provide for them at home. So he clashed a bit with the bishop who later became the archbishop, who later became the cardinal of Cape Town, Cardinal McCann. But they knew each other from school days at CBC in Kimberley, so McCann and Baigrie were able to agree to differ. And so there was this focus on education. Dad believed very, very strongly, and Mum as well, in education.
You said your dad was a surgeon?
Yeah.
And your mum, was she working? Or?
She was a Scot. Mum grew up in just outside Edinburgh in Stirling, and had a Scottish education, which is and was in a good number of those schools of a very high standard. And then she did radiography in the late 1930s. Dad did an undergraduate degree at UCT and then postgraduate surgery medicine at Edinburgh. And so he qualified out of Edinburgh, and they met in effect during their housemanship. Mum was working in the radiography section of Larbert Hospital outside Stirling, and Dad was posted there as a graduated medical student doing his housemanship surgical.
Were they both Scots?
Dad's father was Scot, but Dad's mother was Irish, and he was born in the Eastern Cape because his father came out as an inspector of schools shortly after the after Union. Or in fact, I think he came over before Union, but he came over here as an educationist.
Right. But where were you born? Were you born here in South Africa?
I was born in Port Elizabeth during the war because my mother had come from Scotland, been left by Dad, who they came here because you couldn't join up with another country's forces. You had to join up in World War II with your own country first.
Right.
So they had, I mean, a crazy system, but in some ways. So in order to participate as a medic in the war, Dad couldn't proceed with the British medical forces, if you like, or support medical to the British forces. So they had to get on a ship, beat the submarine barricade, get to Cape Town, catch a train, go to Joburg, and he then had to go through qualifying processes, given that he had an Edinburgh degree, and before he could go north.
So you were born here, and I mean, did you feel half Scottish, half South African, or and were you here in South Africa all through your childhood, or did you?
Yes, apart from one wonderful holiday as children, for Mum to go back and see her family after the war.
Right.
What remained of her family, she lost 2 out of her 3 brothers during the war. And we went back. Bruce, my older brother, he would have been 7. I was 6, and Dermot, the youngest of us, was 3. But we all got on a ship with Mum, who had us on 3 dog leads, so that she could control all 3 children on the boat and avoid us running overboard. We went back for 3-month sort of Christmas-type holiday with the family in England and Scotland. But we grew up knowing that our family came from Scotland.
Right.
That was, and we had lots of cousins and this and that. Yeah.
Okay. So 3 boys.
There were 3 boys at that stage in a row, born in 1942. I was born in 43. Dermot was born after Dad came back. So he was born in 46. And then they took a brief break. And then 2 girls. Gillian was born, I think, in 52. Fiona in 53 or 54. And then Dad was quite sure he'd got the recipe for boys and girls. So he thought, well, we'll just clinch this with a 3rd girl. Mum wanted a large family, but it didn't work. So, yes, I'm not sure to what extent it was directed by church policy or by natural causes. But Mum loved a big family. She came from a very big Scottish family herself.
Right. So that sounds.
And then came 2 boys as a result. One, right. Bob, I think, in 55, and that was supposed to be that. And then in 1961, while I was doing a post-matric here in Grahamstown, we got a letter saying Mum's going to have a baby in the middle of the year or thereabouts.
Right. So it sounds like your childhood was mainly in the Eastern Cape, is it?
We grew up in Rondebosch. Right. We lived in Rondebosch, but we went to. I'm an old Springfield girl for pre-primary. I'm an old CBC Greenpoint boy for primary school, and a old St. Aidan's boy for secondary school.
Right. But you had felt this call on your life to enter into the priesthood and trained, but then ended up in the law. And what happened there?
It wasn't a natural fit between the Jesuits and me, and I was quite sure that the army was out of step, but the army was quite sure that I was the one who was out of step. We had quite a group of South Africans. We fielded our own cricket team and virtually our own rugby team of young chaps who had come over from South Africa. But it was a very English institution with very English norms, which carried a kind of moral status, whereas we saw them as purely cultural. So one by one, we all except one or two left over. It was a time of considerable change in the church. It was the Vatican II, because I went over in '62. It was 2 years novitiate, one in Lincolnshire, one in Edinburgh, and then three years of philosophy. And then a year I was going to go to the London School of Economics and do politics, philosophy, and economics there. But for that, I had to have British A-levels. So I spent a year doing British A-levels, during which things came to a head with the local superiors. And along with, as I say, a few others, I left at that stage and never went through to the LSE. I decided it was more important to come home and reintegrate into my family. And that was, in a way, structured for me, because I was working for Longman's Green in London after I left the Jesuits, and they offered me a position on their executive training program for African education and publications that Longman's did in those days throughout Africa and elsewhere. Very big in educational publishing. So it didn't make sense. I either took the job and the offer of an executive training program, which would locate me immediately within a wholly African context, but my family were right down in the south of Africa, and I would only be able to get annual leave with them and that sort of thing. So it made it more suitable, more natural to go back.
And did you, that sort of sense of calling on your life, is has that remained with you and just been exercised in different ways? You know, a sense of service, a sense of wanting to make a difference in the world, and you grew up in a very Catholic environment. You're now obviously and have been part of this community for many years. Can you maybe just give us a little snapshot of how that faith journey played out for you?
Yes, probably by when I told my dad that when I was 15 that I needed to talk to him after church one Sunday, and so we sat in his car, and he said, yes, my son, what is it? And so I told him I wanted to be a priest, and I wanted to join the Jesuits. And we spoke, and work with youth, with young people. And his concluding words at the end of that conversation were, whatever you do, remember, unto your own self be true, and it doth follow as night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. So unto thine own self be true was a key anchor in my life, and that was the way we had been brought up. And the other quote would be from my older brother Bruce, who originally also thought he wanted to be a Jesuit priest, but before he left school, he became clear that he wanted far more importantly to be a surgeon. And as I left, he said to me, "Jim, enjoy yourself and don't let the tokoloshes get you." So remaining free from oppressive systems of belief and subordination to doctrines was a resistance to that was very strong in all the family. We weren't brought up to obey without good cause. We were taught to think for ourselves and be able to give an account of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
So how did you find your way here to RUC?
Through marriage. After leaving the Jesuits, which was 1968, after 6 years, I fell in love immediately with the daughter of a family in London who had been, her father had been a general practitioner in Pinelands. He was British, fought in the war, came out here afterwards. His daughter went to Springfield. So I knew Colette from Springfield days, and I had stayed in touch with the Muirhead family in England. And when I came out of the Jesuits, I was based in London at that stage. We re-met and fell in love very rapidly. I think parents on both sides encouraged it. I'm not sure that they shouldn't have said, "Well, that's fine, but slow down a bit."
Would you have listened?
Would we have listened? I'm not sure. I suspect so. We were both pretty traditional in certain ways. So, but it wasn't proposed. Everyone said, "No, that's great," and so we were married in February of '69. Colette and I came back in '69, reintegrated into the Baigrie family here, and were based here and married for 20 years in all, if not one or two more. But I had a 40th birthday in 1983, after which I questioned. It was an absolutely wonderful birthday party with extraordinary lekker people of different ages. But at the end of it, I asked myself what my life was really about. I'd kind of done a lot of things, was still doing things successfully, but I went through what we would all, I think, now call a midlife crisis, and I reevaluated my whole life and decided there were questions I had to deal with in myself, about myself, that I had to answer, had to be able to answer and give an account of in myself, which led in the long run to a divorce. Because, again, I'm not sure which is the cart and which is the horse, but I fell in love with someone else as part of this investigation into myself. And so there was a divorce, and the lady with whom I'd fallen in love was also an ex-Catholic. the Catholic Church clearly wasn't interested in marrying a divorced Catholic, especially one who had 3 children in Rondebosch and was still living in Cape Town. So we looked for somewhere to marry, and someone said, go and speak to Douglas Bax at Rondebosch United Church. So Ingrid and I did that, and we both took an instinctive liking to Douglas. And he said, well, look, I'm not guaranteeing that I'll marry you and that the church will want to marry you, but go through the process of premarital exercises from start to finish, no exemptions just because you've done it before. And so there was that period of, I don't know, 3 months, maybe 6 months, I don't remember, but with regular meetings and little exercises and so on with Douglas. And at the end of it, he said he would be very happy to marry us. So we came here to be married and stayed. We liked it. We found people we knew here. We both had connections with UCT, and there were a lot of UCT connections here. And there were also a lot of opposition politic connections here. And coming back from England, I'd been as active as I could be in opposition politics going through the late 70s and the whole of the 80s. So we were married here in 1993. And that lasted until 2016, when Ingrid told me that I wasn't part of her future plans. And I stayed here. I came and spoke to Robert, went and spoke to a lawyer, and I went and spoke to a counselor. Peter Fox said he couldn't help because he knew both parties, but he referred me to someone else. So I put myself in the hands of 3 experts in their trade and stayed in touch with them. And then met up with Liesl. And she and I have been together and based at RUC ever since then. So I'm part of the furniture in a way.
You're a very valued part of the furniture, Jim. So tell us a little bit more about your kids. I think you've got 4 children now and some grandchildren. And I think you just went and had some time with them in the US of A. But yeah.
Yes, had a wonderful holiday with the both the children that are now living there. Right. Natasha, the oldest, is still here in Cape Town, living in Claremont with husband Dave and 2 daughters, my first grandchildren, Katrina and Ella. Katrina at Stellenbosch University and Ella writing matric this year, both from Westerford. And Ella's going to be doing a gap year at a girls' school in Edinburgh next year.
Wonderful.
Which I'm delighted about. And that was Tasha. Second came Rob. He was the first to show the red hair. There's red hair in my family. So Rob was the first redhead, and he went to Wet Pups and was then about to go to Sachs when everything got changed and he went to Bishop's. And he has thrived. He went to Stellenbosch University, has retained close links with a lot of his varsity mates, and went into financial services, came and worked in the office where Ingrid was running the office and I was doing the professional work. Rob worked with us for some time. Through that, he met professionals from overseas who used to come and visit and with whom I had working relationships with international work. So he went to, one of them offered him a job in London. So he went to London, and from there he went into banking. And when he was married he married an American lady, American girlfriend in London. They were married in the US of A because that's where she came from. And they went to come the meltdown in 2007, 2008. They decided they were going to the East, Singapore and Hong Kong. And they went about as far as they could go in those banking circles. Didn't want to carry on doing that. So they both, and then they had a little girl, and they just changed their lives completely. And Rob has been working for Conservation International for the last 7, 8, 9 years. And his wife, Linda, is at the moment exploring various options in California. Sorry, this is going on too long probably, but
yes.
Okay, so Tasha, Rob, Vicky, second redhead, St. Sips, and then when Colette and I separated, Colette went back to England for a while. Vicky went with her. So Vicky did A-levels in UK, in Cambridge, and then did a London degree, and got work in London, met her husband through work, and they are now with a little 3-year-old to 4-year-old becoming next week, based in San Francisco. And then Nicholas was born while Colette and I were still married. And so that was a very difficult situation for everyone. And we all managed it as best we could for 4 or 5, no, not as long as that, 2 or 3 years. The situation became untenable for both Colette and me eventually. And so I left home, and by then Nicholas was already 2. So Nicholas was number 4. He went to UCT. He went to school at Saks, UCT, and is now working with a company that does climate change work here in Cape Town, funded out of Europe, UK, and USA, looking at areas that are likely to be most humanly devastated by climate change over the next 30 years.
Sure.
So that's the work he does. And Nick and his partner Giovanna live down beyond Simonstown in Murdoch Valley. They both are strongly maritime and marine involved. Nick's done national and international sailing, and Giovanna has done all sorts of things in relation to marine work and marine biology, which is her degree. So those are the children. A disparate bunch, and fortunately, given the history, everyone really puts a lot of work into being with each other, and there's a lot of fun is had when everyone is together. And they are all together this day in Los Angeles because one of my youngest brothers, younger sons, is being married in LA today. And so there are about 25 or more Baigries in LA. There are actually only 4 or 5 of us left in Cape Town at this stage.
Jim, I know you have battled with some health issues over recent years. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. At school, I could never play squash. I always played baseline tennis. I could never field in the slips at cricket, and I could never face fast bowling. Tennis, I couldn't play net. And there were reasons, everyone gave reasons for these different things. And when I started long distance running, just before I turned 40, I joined the kind of marathon craze at the time, because I'd done a lot of running, cross-country running at school and in England. I tripped occasionally on cat's eyes in the roads. And then I found myself tripping quite frequently in the early 2000s. And in 2003, a good friend, a GP in UK, whom I'd met over here, we went on a walk one Sunday morning. I was staying with them on a business trip over the weekend. And he said, "Jim, you got a foot problem." And I said, "Well, I don't know about that." And he said, "Yeah, it's called foot drop here. It's called something else in South Africa, but you need to get to a specialist as soon as you get off the plane and go home and start some treatment." So I was diagnosed with a neuro, sort of complicated name, but it's a neurological condition which results in my case, the myelin sheathing of your long nerves, which are the lower leg and the forearm. The myelin sheathing is consumed within the body, and by the immune system, which doesn't have enough to eat otherwise, so it starts eating the host. And there are two forms. I've got the myelin sheathing short-circuiting. Other people have the axonal nerve attacked, and the result is very similar. It can originate through an overactive immune system, or it can originate genetically by inheritance. I was given the former diagnosis and followed that with no improvement at all for 9 years. I then had to change specialists, and the new specialist interviewed me for 5 minutes and then said, "I think you've got the wrong diagnosis. But you come from a medical family. There are people who really need me, you don't, in the wards. So I'm going to go and work in the wards for the rest of this appointment time, and I'll come back at the end. Here's the book. Read the book. Tell me which condition you think you've got, and I'll see you. You've paid for an hour. I'll see you in 50 minutes." I read these things, and I said, "I got this one." He said, "Yeah. So you don't need me. You must." The one thing I'd always said is, "There's nothing I can do." And the answer was always no. You're going to be in a wheelchair. Your immune system is going to do this throughout your body. There's no use making false promises to you.
And what's what's the problem? Does it manifest itself in pain, bad balance?
It's balance goes. That's just the tripping was part of it, but that's due to the foot dragging. Neural messaging is delayed and is broken. Yeah. So the brain doesn't get clear messages, and its instructions don't reach the nerve endings clearly. Right. So even if your brain gets the message right and sends the right answer, the answer is arriving at the foot or the fingertips a millisecond, a nanosecond late, and so you drop things and you trip and fall. So it affects motor or all fine motor coordination. So my lower legs are in splints, effectively from the top of the calf down into the shoes built in. And these nerves deteriorate, and so your manual dexterity disappears. So I can't do buttons and pins and paper clips and a whole lot of things.
Typing?
Handwriting goes to hell. And
Typing?
Yes.
Texting?
One of the three nerves is still operating well in the hands, and it happens to leave me with digital dexterity. So I taught myself to touch type in year 1 in the Jesuits. I got a Pittman's course, and I was allowed to teach myself to touch type. So I've been typing ever since, and it still is my salvation, because my handwriting is pretty completely unpredictable.
And does this mean you have to have regular rehab, things you need to do to, maintain a condition? Is it deteriorating? What's the prognosis?
It's a degenerating condition. At the moment, there are no known cures, but the main focus is to try to keep it where it is and not ensure that there's no extension of it. And fortunately, that is one of the characteristics of the inherited or genetic source of the condition, is that it tends to remain localized.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's immune system driven, it's going to follow the immune system throughout your body.
Yeah.
So rehab, fitness, exercise becomes critically important, so that the proximal muscular systems remain operative. So when it's 10 years now since that 2013 correct diagnosis, so I've had physio throughout that period. I've done Pilates for most of that period. I've done swimming for most. I used to do a lot of marathon running, which I couldn't do any longer. And I had been one of Tim Noakes's guinea pigs in the 80s, when we used to sign up in order to carry sample bags and do different things, and people were testing theories. And I spoke with him, and he said, forget about running again, is my advice. We get far better results with swimming.
Yeah.
Free of gravity, but maximal exercise. So I've been swimming initially at sports science, now at Virgin in Claremont. I've been swimming again. I used to swim at school competitively and run competitively, but so now I swim at almost exactly a quarter of the speed I used to swim at school, and get overtaken by all sorts of other little people. But I swim twice a week. I have physio twice a week. I do rehab exercises, and I do heat treatments in the sauna and the steam room at Virgin Active.
Yeah. And so, Jim, what does fun look like for you? When you're not working and doing your rehab. How do you enjoy yourself? What are your hobbies, interests?
It used to be sailing. I grew up sailing with Dad. It was a kind of family requirement. The boys were lashed to the mast and taken sailing. But I loved it. I was the only one who really took to it. And so when I came back here, all the children were given an introduction to sailing. None of the three younger ones took to it, but the fourth, Nicholas, took to it literally like a duck to water. And so he grew up sailing. His mother and I moved to Sikuflay. He grew up at Sikuflay. He's been sailing since he was 2 or 3, and he's still sailing. So sailing was for me a thing. I went through keel boats and Royal Cape sailing and did a couple of ocean passages. But that became unmanageable by about 10 or 11 years ago. I couldn't do the things you need to do on a boat. And I couldn't run. So exercise was restricted in that way. And what is fun? Fun is friends and family. I got a great deal of pleasure from reconnecting with my children at different stages. Fun for me now is time with my siblings, time with my children, and time with my grandchildren. It's just a wonderful feeling at the end of a fairly erratic and turbulent life to still be welcome, amongst your own family. Some of whom have looked at you askance from time to time, but we get on. We want to get on. I think we believe and like getting on. One of the family keeps a bit distant from us, and so not everything is ideal, but we get on with each other, and I love that. But I mean, carrying on with my philosophy and my reflections on religion as I understand it, and Christianity as I understand and try to practice it, is a big focus for me, both in terms of reading, writing, and conversations, and discussion groups and things like that.
Yeah. The brain is still working well, even if the other parts of the body are failing you a bit.
Not everyone would agree that the brain is working well, but I enjoy the exercise. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Jim. I mean, just a final question. What's on the horizon for you? I mean, any new developments, hopes and dreams for the next few years?
Well, yeah. I guess the answer is the biggest one in a long time, because I'm in my 80th year, and I turn 80 in November, and the 4 children have said that their 80th birthday present for me is to tell me that Liesl and I have to keep ourselves free for the period of the 16th to 24th of November, and we will be told in due course, we will be given tickets to wherever we are going to be taken, and the 4 children, we're going to have 3, 4, 5 days simply with the 4 children. No one else.
At a location to be
disclosed, provided your passports have the right visas. So since it all started, it's clarified that it's going to be in Southern Africa, where visas aren't required. So, but whether it's South Africa or somewhere a little bit north, I don't know. But that's a fantastically exciting thing. And for the rest, my 80th year has been focused strongly on reviewing the various cycles of my life and the various disciplines within my life, and reading and writing around those things, and sharing those sorts of conversations with grandchildren. I love asking myself, how are you going to explain that to the grandchildren? Because I've got grandchildren from now between the ages of 2 and 20. Yeah. So, and making sense of life with young people has been critically important to me right from the beginning. Yeah. So I live in the present, and I love trying to keep up with modern physics, modern cosmology, and what we learn about the universe. And that sort of thing, and the history of the church and all those things. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. It's been wonderful to have more time to chat and get to know you a little bit better. And I just want to say on behalf of RUC, thank you for all the contributions you've made to this place, even just in recent days, helping facilitate some legacy donations, etc. So thank you so much for your time today, and we wish you well in this 80th year with all the celebrations that will ensue.
It's a wonderful community, and I love being part of it, and that's great. I didn't say that early enough. Thank you for enabling me to say it now.
And Jimmy has just, post the original interview, asked if he could add a few thoughts to my final question, which I think was about the future and what it holds for you.
Correct. Thank you. And thanks, Aristide. Thank you both for allowing me to add a postscript, as it were. We spoke throughout the interview about my life in the past. And then your last question was about the present and the future. And I really felt I didn't answer that at all adequately. So hence my request to give me a second bite at the cherry. And I remember speaking in it about the importance to me of my siblings and obviously particularly my children and grandchildren. But I knew time had run out, and that was really as far as I got. But for me, talking about the future is actually a way of trying to get at what is most deep and valuable in the present, because that's what I would like most to build into the future. So, and for me, obviously, the really most important person in my present and my future is Liesl. And her whole family is now an integral part of my life as well. And your question about the future, for my 75th year in 2018, Liesl chose as a New Year's resolution, which she proposed we make, and we did. She chose the slogan 3650, which is 365 days a year for 10 years. Let's have a 10-year plan. And so we've been working with 3650 since then, and this year we're coming to about halfway through. And between us, we have 137 years of human life, of which we've shared only 7. And so every day is a continuing exploration into each other's life experiences in different ways. And I rejoice to say mostly it leads to laughter, and it involves a fair amount of banter and teasing. But coming together so late in life, and with both of us having strong family backgrounds, there's an awful lot about each other and about each other's lives that we live and have to live through. We both grew up in very strict but very different Christian traditions, and our lives have led us both to question and adapt many of those beliefs and doctrines that used to be fundamental in what was taught to us, in order to remain true to the teachings and the values that we find in the life of Jesus and in our own lives. And so that adaptation of life is a very important element, and has been for both of us all our lives. So that's a strong unifying factor. And continuing this is very stimulating. It's also very demanding. But it's a daily exercise, and we now laugh about the fact that we obviously are going to need at least another 3650 10-year plan in order to catch up.
Achieve the first one.
So we're slow starters, put it this way. Yeah, it might take 7,300 to do 3650. But Liesl's lifelong commitment to music, to poetry, to writing, and to rowing are all completely new territory to me. But I've come to value and to really enjoy engaging with them and with the completely new networks of people and friends that they've introduced me to. And so far, Liesl has survived her entry into the whole Baigrie family, both here in the UK and in California. And she's come through it comparatively unscathed, and we're a very noisy lot. So that's a big adaptation and integration that she's making in her life. So for both of us, the future is a happy prospect of shared further exploration into subjects and life skills that have been important to us all our lives before we came together and since we've come together. And to conclude, and it's here at RUC under Robert's leadership, where the RUC emphasis is on contemporary theology and contemporary exegesis, scriptural exegesis, on community, on the poor and the oppressed, and the underprivileged, as well as on, characteristically of Robert and Willem, of art and music as very important dimensions of human life and of interpreting human experience. All this makes RUC a very happy home for us as the context within which to continue our lives' journeys together. And I really wanted to try to say that. So thanks for giving me the chance, to both of you.
Pleasure, Jimmy. Well, thank you. And I look forward, and I'm sure everyone else at RUC does, to continuing that journey with you both. And thank you for the contributions you've made and for sharing so openly with us in this iteration and our first iteration. So thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you. Thanks, Aristide.